the powerful story of Moses. The story of Moses is one of the most powerful tales of courage, faith, and God's deliverance. It begins in a time of deep oppression when the Israelites, God's chosen people, were enslaved in Egypt. The Pharaoh, threatened by their growing numbers, ordered that all male Hebrew babies be killed at birth. But God had a plan, and his plan began with the birth of a baby boy named Moses. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the inspiring Bible stories. Moses was born during a time when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. The Pharaoh, fearing the growing number of Israelites, ordered that all Hebrew male babies be killed. However, a Levite couple, Amram and Jochebed, decided to hide their newborn son. For 3 months they kept him in hiding, but when they could no longer conceal him, Jochebed crafted a small basket out of papyrus, coated it with tar and pitch, and placed her baby in it. She gently set the basket afloat on the Nile River, trusting God's protection for her child. The baby's sister, Miriam, watched from a distance as the basket drifted along the river. It floated near the place where Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe. When she saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her servant to fetch it. Upon opening the basket, she found the crying infant and, moved with compassion, decided to adopt him. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Miriam, who had been watching, approached Pharaoh's daughter and suggested that a Hebrew woman could nurse the child. With Pharaoh's daughter's consent, Miriam brought Jochebed, Moses' mother, to nurse her own child until he was old enough to live in the palace. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, raised as a prince with access to all the riches and wisdom of Egypt. However, despite his royal upbringing, Moses never forgot that he was a Hebrew. As a young man, he began to witness the suffering of his people. One day he saw an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew slave. Enraged by the injustice, Moses struck the Egyptian and killed him. Realizing what he had done and fearing the consequences, Moses fled Egypt to escape Pharaoh's wrath. He journeyed to the land of Midian, a desert region far from Egypt, where he found refuge. There he helped the daughters of a Midianite priest named Jethro by drawing water for their flocks. In gratitude, Jethro welcomed Moses into his home, and eventually, Moses married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah. Moses settled into a simple life as a shepherd, content to live quietly in the wilderness. Years passed, and Moses tended his sheep near Mount Horeb. One day, he noticed a strange sight, a bush that was on fire, yet the flames did not consume it. Curious, Moses approached the bush. Suddenly, a voice called out to him from within the flames, "Moses, Moses!" It was the voice of God. God told Moses to remove his sandals, for he was standing on holy ground. Then, God revealed his plan to deliver the Israelites from their oppression in Egypt. He called Moses to be the one to lead them out of slavery. Moses was overwhelmed by the call. He doubted his ability to lead and protested, saying he was slow of speech and not worthy of the task. But God reassured Moses, promising to be with him every step of the way. God also gave Moses signs to perform, such as turning his staff into a serpent, and provided Moses' brother, Aaron, to speak on his behalf. With God's assurance, Moses returned to Egypt to confront Pharaoh. Upon his return, Moses, with Aaron by his side, stood before Pharaoh and declared, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." Pharaoh, hardened and prideful, refused to release the Israelites. As a result, God sent a series of plagues upon Egypt to demonstrate his power and compel Pharaoh to let his people go. These plagues brought devastation to the land, beginning with the waters of the Nile turning to blood. The people of Egypt were unable to drink from the river, and fish perished in great numbers. Despite the calamity, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he continued to refuse. In response, God sent a plague of frogs which swarmed the land and filled every home. When Pharaoh still refused, God sent gnats and flies that tormented the people. Then came a terrible pestilence that killed the Egyptians' livestock, followed by painful boils that afflicted both man and beast. Next, a destructive hailstorm ravaged the land, followed by swarms of locusts that devoured what little remained of Egypt's crops. Still, Pharaoh's heart remained hard. Then darkness descended upon Egypt for 3 days, a thick, oppressive darkness that could be felt. Despite this, Pharaoh remained defiant. Finally, God announced the last and most terrible plague, the death of the firstborn in every Egyptian household. Before this plague, Moses instructed the Israelites to prepare for their departure. Each family was to sacrifice a lamb and place its blood on their doorposts. That night, the angel of death passed through Egypt, killing every firstborn except for those in the homes marked with the blood of the lamb. The grief in Egypt was immense, and even Pharaoh's own firstborn son perished. Overcome with sorrow and fear, Pharaoh finally relented and ordered Moses and the Israelites to leave Egypt. Thus began the Exodus, as Moses led the people out of Egypt toward the Promised Land. However, Pharaoh soon regretted his decision and gathered his army to pursue the Israelites. As Moses and the Israelites journeyed, they came to the shores of the Red Sea. Seeing Pharaoh's army approaching in the distance, the people panicked, believing they were trapped between the sea and their enemies. But Moses, trusting in God, reassured the Israelites. At God's command, Moses stretched out his staff over the waters, and a miraculous event occurred. The Red Sea parted, creating a dry path through the sea. The Israelites hurriedly crossed the sea, and as they reached the other side, Pharaoh's army pursued them. But as soon as the Egyptians entered the sea, God caused the waters to collapse, drowning Pharaoh's soldiers and chariots. The Israelites were safe, and they rejoiced in their deliverance. Moses and the people sang a song of praise to God, celebrating his mighty power and the salvation he had brought to his people. With the Egyptians defeated and the Red Sea behind them, the Israelites continued their journey toward the land that God had promised to their ancestors. It was the beginning of a long and arduous journey through the wilderness, but they were now a free people, led by Moses, the servant of God. The journey to the Promised Land would be long and fraught with challenges, but the exodus from Egypt marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Israelites. Through Moses, God had delivered them from the most powerful empire on earth. No longer slaves, they were now a people set apart for God, a nation with a divine destiny. Moses, the baby drawn from the waters of the Nile, had become the great deliverer of his people, chosen by God to lead them from bondage into freedom. His story is a testament to the power of faith, the courage of obedience, and the unwavering love of a God who never abandons his people. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.